Hello, everyone. Welcome into Above My Pay Grade. My name is Eric, and I have my friend Matt here with me today. Matt and I met, as many of you know, I'm in the military. Matt is also in the military. And we got to talking one day, and we had a lot of things in common. See the world the same way. And I wanted to talk to Matt about his experiences, his experience in the military, and then what he's doing on the side. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on. This is kind of exciting. This is my first time. As you said, we had lots of things in common. So it's going to be fun to unpack that. However, I've heard, usually on like a podcast or a video or something, that people are supposed to be different. So we'll try to get some conflict in there as well. Where did you want to go and start off with?
Yeah, man. I think so. One of the frustrations I've felt, and I'm sure you have, I know a lot of people who watch this channel do, is they don't know where to start. And that's why I focus a lot on economics. I think a lot of it has to do with religion or lack thereof in the West. But I think in the United States, incentives are broken. And I think the base layer of incentives is economics. And I think the way to fix, one of the analogies I use often is if you were back in school, think back to your high school days, and your professor, your teacher left the room during a test and said, make sure you guys don't look at the book. And you have some integrity, but so you don't look at the book, but you see all your other classmates doing it, right? And you get your grade back and you get a B and everyone else gets an A. And then you proceed to tell the professor, hey, everyone else cheated. And you see, they don't care. They don't actually care. Eventually, those people that cheat are going to get the opportunities. That's just the way the world works. And eventually, you're going to start to question your own morals. Like, what am I doing here when everyone else is cheating and getting away with it? And little me, who has integrity, is being punished for it. That's kind of how I perceive the world today, both politically, economically, but the big one being the base layer of it all, economics. That's where I see the world today, is the incentives are broken. And if you want to be an honest actor in the system, you're going to pay the price, because there's always your drunk insolvent Uncle Sam to bail out the people who are misbehaving. So yeah, I'd love to see hear your perspective.
Well, let me step that back a little bit. Sounds to me like what we're trying to do here is to fix America.
Yes. And I think another perspective I have is you can get so caught up. We live in a world of 24/7 news and then social media. I can't fix Maui, right? Whatever's going on in Maui. There's a lot of stuff going on there, but that's not my neighborhood. I can maybe fix, and that's how we need to focus. Like if you're trying to solve the world's problems, this country's at war, this country's starving, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. You can drive yourself nuts. So when I say fix America, I mean, do what you can to fix your circle of influence.
Yeah. Think globally, act locally, right?
Bingo.
So before we fix a problem, I think we must identify that problem. First step. You can't just present a solution without completely understanding the problem. I think what I heard you say before is that there's lack of personal responsibility and accountability. But I think at the end of the day, the problem that we're identifying, that you and I identified or complained about maybe the last time that we talked about, was that the America that we know is no longer aligned with the principles and the values that we were taught or that we grew up with. So the country is changing under our feet. Some of that change is good. Some of that change is bad, or we see it as bad or threatening, right?
Correct.
So the problem is the principles of America are no longer being lived out or are no longer being adhered to by Americans. Is that an accurate problem statement?
Yes. Yes. But I would go further and say, even if you do, it's not, from an economic perspective, it's not profitable to compete with a money printer, because if you have friends in high places, meaning instead of your incentive being to serve your customers, the incentive is to get as close to Washington as possible, because the most profitable thing you can do is be close to Washington, because they print money.
Mm-hmm.
And they have more money even than the people in the country, because they can print it. Think ESG. It's unprofitable.
Right.
It's not something that in the free, if it's better, cheaper, more dense, right, people will naturally buy it. If it's not, and it has to be subsidized, who's your best friend in that arena? The government, if you're an ESG company, for instance. But so that's how I think about it. Yes, the principles are not being adhered to, but to a certain degree, I think that laziness that we're seeing in the world, or potentially laziness isn't a good word, maybe apathy that we see to the problems, is because people are still able, because of the money printer, to have their cake in circuses, their bread in circuses. Right. And
there's a safety net.
Yeah. And that safety net is only as good as the money printer.
Yeah. So I'm a very systematic person. So let's set that foundation. So if the principles aren't being adhered to, let's identify the principles. To me, okay, so the reason that this came up was because I told you that I'm an immigrant. And I am. I came to the States in 1996 at age 12. I became a citizen in 2005. When, as part of that, I swore an oath. Part of that oath is to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And then I enlisted in 2018, and I took the same oath with the same rider in there to protect the country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, I'm not going to know how to protect the country and who the threats are or what the threats are if I don't understand the principles of what it means to be an American citizen, right? And becoming a citizen kind of taught me some of that. I mean, you do have to go through a class and learn some things about what it means to be an American. But at the end of the day, I think it's very quick and easy to explain the United States for locals, citizens or non-citizens alike, in that it's the only country that has codified in its governing documents the principle of individual liberty, that the individual has freedoms and that other individuals and governing bodies need to respect that freedom. Individual liberty, however, is different from freedom in that individual liberty has a built-in understanding of self-limiting. So I'm only as free. How do I say this? I can only do what I want to do and exercise my freedoms up until I start stepping on you. That now I've become an oppressor. If I want to have a fire, let's say like a bonfire in my yard, right? And that lights your fence or your house on fire, now I have run a risk and I have started oppressing you. So individual liberty has a built-in self-limiter where it says I can be free up until I start oppressing my neighbor or whatever. The founding fathers made that promise in the Declaration of Independence of individual liberty. They then wrote the Constitution, which is the manual on how to run the government to deliver on that promise. And then they went further and enumerated the basic human rights in the Bill of Rights that all individuals have to be able to enact individual liberty. And the Bill of Rights is kind of like the citizen's task. We have to live out the first, second, and so on down the fourth, all of those amendments every day to deliver on that promise of individual liberty. So that's my baseline, that's my foundation, and those are the principles. We can apply those principles to anything from economics to self-defense, to knowledge, to schools, because within that individual liberty, you have to have trust and you have to have responsibility. If the individual, I mean, the Constitution starts with we the people. So if I, the individual, don't properly use the First Amendment to get to information, to critically think about and process information that's coming from Washington or the talking heads or Warren Buffett or Alan Greenspan, right? The folks that run the country and the world through economics, then I am misusing the First Amendment, and I'm not really doing my part to live up my personal responsibility to assert my individual liberty and being a good neighbor and being a cog in the machine, right? If each person does that, then we, the people, take control of our country. And it's, to address your point, it's people's apathy of, I don't know, either it's too big or it's too many thoughts or it's too much work or they're lazy or for whatever reason, they don't want to do their citizens' duty. And this is what rubs me the wrong way. They're not willing to put in the effort, but they have the guts to tell me, who have taken the test, who has put in service, that I'm doing it wrong. Or that I don't get it, that I don't understand it, or that for whatever reason, I need to be doing it a different way. And I think that is what is super irritating to folks like you and I. We have put in the time. We've accepted that responsibility. We're trying to continue to fight for individual liberty and freedom, to keep those things protected. And it feels oftentimes like folks on the other side just want to give all of that away. And we're kind of losing the individual responsibility, the individual liberty that makes America and Americans great. So that's my base level. Now we can take that whole thing, that principle, and we can apply it to whichever topic you want to talk about.
Okay, real quick, your mic is rubbing on your collar, just so you know.
Which side is it? This side?
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so building
Sorry,
on...
that
so
was a lot.
Yeah, but I have a lot of questions from that.
Is that better?
Yeah, bingo. So when you say duty, kind of, we took a lot of these things for granted. This is kind of how I think. Took a lot of these things for granted for years and years. And in the last 3 years, there's been a lot of philosophical questions that have come about for me that didn't just have a black and white answer. Let me give you an example. So you're talking about the kind of the non-aggression principle, like your liberty, your ability to swing your arm stops where you meet somebody else's face, kind of thing. But some of the biggest questions in our world today, political ones like abortion, like the cerveza sickness, and should you take this mandated drug? One side is arguing, hey, listen, your fist, meaning your immune system or lack thereof, or your ability to spread, is impeding my face because therefore you have to, or you're impeding my bodily autonomy by telling me what I can do with this child. And so I would say those questions have gotten more nuanced, at least for me, because I have my opinion on them, obviously, but they're not just this black and white answer. But I think both you and I want to follow up with what you think our duty is. But I think both you and I are very cautious about giving the government power. That's kind of my baseline principle. So individuals who have power versus the government who has the power to decide. And it's not that the government is uniquely evil, but that they have the unique monopoly on power. That's why.
Right? Well, that's why they're the government, as they do have the monopoly on power, right?
Yep.
And violence. If you don't have the ability to enforce your will, then you're not really a threat or a leading force. So I think when it comes to duty and all of these hot topics, which I would love to talk about, because I don't think that they're nearly as complicated as a lot of people make them. And they shouldn't be nearly as divisive as the talking heads are presenting them as. The change, however, we should talk about the change, because we've been fighting a war for a very long time. Let me know if you can hear any of the background noise, and I'll close the door.
No, good.
The change. Okay, let's take a step back. Okay, thousands of years ago, the natural state of existence is oppression. It doesn't matter whether you look at animals in the wild, let's say a cougar hunting an antelope, or I'm sorry, there's no antelope in North America, a deer or an elk. Those with the claws, with the fangs, will oppress those without them. This is the entire argument behind the Second Amendment. All living things have the right to defend itself against an oppressing force. That's the principle. This country, in the promise of individual liberty, is a very unnatural state. It's the first time in history where a group of people got together and said that oppression isn't okay. We as individuals matter. It's not okay for a king or some leader to oppress us and just tell us what to do. We matter as an individual, and we have the right to defend ourselves against that. So if we track that from thousands of years ago to today, the real issue starts with, or the real clash of ideas starts with the creation of the United States and having the audacity to say that an individual matters and an individual should have freedom. That line of thinking then split. It continued on in the US as it is, and in Western society. Europe and England and France followed with all of their liberation movements. And then it went sideways with Karl Marx, where he had some different ideas, or he took Eastern collectivism and he wrapped it into socialism and communism to try to deliver on the same promise. If the individual matters and we make all individuals equal, then theoretically this should work. There's only one problem: the human condition. Humans are selfish. They're going to want more. So it doesn't matter which system you put them in, they're going to figure out a way to make the system work for themselves. Selfishness will always rule. So now you have Western thinking of individual liberty, and you have on the other side communism or socialist or collectivist thinking, right? So, sorry, I'm trying to wrap this all the way around. There was a reason that my mind wanted to go to this place. Oppression and individual liberty. So that's right. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Western mindset with individual liberty or communism. The individual has to carry their own weight. The reason communism doesn't work is because somebody gets selfish and they stop doing the work. They shirk their responsibility. That's where, corruption and things enter in. And on the Western mindset, the things that we're experiencing now, since 2020, is people are showing blatantly their apathy, their unwillingness to step up to their citizens' duty, to take on that responsibility. So it's the same thing in two different systems. If the individual does not step up to take their own responsibility and live their life to execute on whichever system they want to support, somebody is going to do it for them. Oppression is the natural state. Government, a leader, a talking head, a celebrity will take that space in your brain and tell you what to do with it. Right? So until we decide to manage our own brains and be an individual and accept that responsibility, primarily being responsible first and foremost for our thoughts, secondly, for our bodies, then we can work together and we can make a better tomorrow. The moment we stop doing that or shirk that responsibility, we allow somebody else to do it for us. And then we have reasons to complain, because then they're going to do something or they're going to instruct us. So let's make this real. Let's take this away from theory and put this into reality. Let's look at COVID. First and foremost, let's think back. Forget all of the stuff that was said since the beginning. But think back to like April or March of 2020. We know, as US citizens, that China doesn't like us. They are fighting very dirty to try to give us a hard time, or probably eventually trying to conquer us, trying to spread their way of thinking everywhere, right?
Can I clarify that?
Sure.
How do you know that?
Okay, so do you remember the show Sequest in the mid-90s?
Mm-mm. I don't remember that.
It was a show about a submarine, and in there, the Eastern Bloc, or essentially the Chinese, was the opposing force. So we have known that China is an enemy of the United States for a very long time. Ideologically, they're opposite us. Yep. They're communists, right? They want to push their way of thinking. They've been that way since what, the 50s? Wasn't that Mao, right?
Yeah, I think he might have been, 50s to 70 or something like that. But my question, when you talked about conquering.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting there.
Yeah, sorry.
So we know that ideologically, they've been butting heads with us for a very long time. Now we're starting to see things and waking up to the fact that they play very dirty, that they're not using traditional tactics. If you look at how much farmland that they've bought across the United States, much of it being in Colorado, if you look at the Colorado housing market and how it went like crazy high, large part of that is from out-of-staters buying property in, say, like the mountains or Vail or whatever, and not just out of state, but out of country. I just saw a map that shows the United States receiving thousands of millionaires and China losing thousands of millionaires. So they're either going to Australia or the US or, someplace else. There was that brief that they offered about China's tactics and how they want to kind of infiltrate their mindset here. Confucius Institutes, I think they call them like little red classrooms, where they'll send China, the Communist Party, will send a teacher to the United States to earn their citizenship, or to teach in an exchange school, or somehow get in front of kids and then teach kids communist values. Start them off young, right? If you can win the minds and the hearts of the kids, they will grow up and embody those ideals. They have Confucius Institutes that typically sit on university campuses that do exactly the same thing. They're teaching communist values, and communism makes a lot of sense on paper. I mean, if you think about it, Jesus was the first communist. He treated everybody equally, said sin was equal. He died for everybody.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, doesn't make him communist, because he also talked about envy, which I would say socialism and communism have a lot to do with. So I would say he had spheres of authority: family, husband, wife, church, government. And so a lot of people put all those spheres into love everyone and give that to the government. But God talks about spheres of authority and like what parents have authority over their kids, what the church has authority. and then what the government's role is.
Well,
and a lot of people place the government in the role of church and family.
Yeah, there's one thing that I think humans mess up. I do believe that Jesus taught essentially a version of communism. The difference being that communism is run by humans. It's humans in leadership roles governing humans, and they're all supposed to be equal. Jesus taught everybody's equal, but I'm the leader. God is the leader, right? And only with that could a system like that work. For us mere mortals here on the planet, we need a bit of a hierarchy to organize things, to shape things. And I think it is much safer, because of all of the atrocities committed by communists ages ago, to leave the power in the hands of the individual. And that's where that ideology between the US and China butts heads. China says, no, the government, communism, the leaders tell you how to live your life. And in America, it says the individual tells the individual how to live his or her life. And as all of the individuals decide how to live the life, you get a massive sample of how to live life well. You don't have a top-down model of the government telling you how to live. You have 330 million people figuring out how to live each their own lives. So you have a much greater sample group, and therefore I think much more success.
So,
but we're getting like a little.
Well, I want to clarify something. So do you think freedom is a natural desire of man? Like in their heart, that when oppressed or living in a communist regime, what have you, they naturally want individual freedom. Do you think that's a natural desire or not?
I don't think it's a desire. I think it's a natural state of existence.
So
it's not like a want.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
a need.
I am born. Yeah. It's a reality. Like I am born free. Then I get oppressed by various forces.
So where do you think, to me, that would align with, and this has been the confusing part over the last couple of years, and this is why I always go back to economics, is what in that world of individual responsibility, mm-hmm. when you don't take individual responsibility, you experience pain, mm-hmm. economic, personal, whatever.
Well, you experience pain regardless. But when you take the responsibility, you ascribe meaning to that pain.
Sure, but I would also say that the pain of regret is worse than the pain of responsibility. So in theory, though, like you live a life of personal responsibility, like you're talking about as a citizen, or you live a life dependent on the government. That person who's dependent on the government is going to be more miserable, is what you're saying. But what draws that person, because there's more and more people, and this is why I keep going back to economics, that have this theory that maybe if I give this to the government, it will be better. And for a while, they feel that way. Like we've lived under Social Security and federal income tax for a long time. And there's a lot of people that advocate for it. It's like, it's great. It saves. It's a stopgap for people. And my theory is, who was it? Maybe Ben Franklin. I can't remember. Those who want safety over freedom will have neither.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's this time period at which giving responsibility to somebody else feels good because the consequences of giving that responsibility to somebody else haven't manifested yet.
Well, and it's because people have been enslaved by consumerism.
Fair enough, but you would think if it's a natural state to want to be free, why do they keep enslaving themselves?
Because of indulgence. Because sugar is delicious. Because it's fun to be drunk. Because it's easier to eat a donut than to do a push-up.
Yeah.
But they we get them early on as kids, and we teach them about the delicious and fun things in life, and we don't show them the delayed gratification. And I guess this is where that ideological headbutting of China being our enemy, right, and that history comes back. Have you heard of the Russian misinformation campaign that they started in the 60s?
In regards to the United States?
Yeah, like this conspiracy theory type thing.
If you're talking, I can't remember the guy that did that interview.
Yuri Bezmenov. Yeah. So I don't know if this is real or not. It's been floating around, and I don't know, but it makes kind of sense to me. Okay, if you knew that there was no way that your ideology, again, communism, collectivism against individualism in the West, right? Russia. If you knew that you couldn't compete, you couldn't outspend them, you knew that you had to destroy them from the inside out, and the Russians are very good at psychological operations. Understand your enemy. Art of War. Who wrote The Art of War? Sun Tzu. Understand your enemy, right? They studied us, and they saw a crack in individual liberty. If you can peel responsibility away from individual liberty and teach people that they can have individual liberty without responsibility, then they can have all of the fun without any of the work, and you divorce those two principles from the same concept, you can split apart Western thought. And so maybe they did send over agents who started working in the universities, who taught the students then essentially critical theory, which in 2020 we saw as critical race theory. But critical theory is a fringe psychological discipline that essentially turns traditional Western logical thought on its head. Traditional Western logical thought that we got from the Greeks, that was the greatest gift that the Greeks gave civilization, was logic, right? Logic says, let's look at a system, we set the premises, and then based off of the premises, we get the conclusion. So if we want a different conclusion, we change one of the premises up here. Critical theory says, forget the premises, the outcome is what we're focusing on. So find the quickest, easiest thing to change to get the outcome where it is. An easy example in the form of critical race theory is all Black people need to make the same amount of money as the white people. So you're not going to look at the premises and all of the factors of why most African Americans or Black people. I say Black people because I'm an African American. I was born in Africa. And then I became an American. So if that doesn't make me an African American, I don't know what does. We don't look at all of the factors of why Black people don't make as much money as white people. Critical race theory says, no, we just take the money from the white people and give it to the Black people. That's outcome-based rationale, right? I don't know if we can argue about whether that's sustainable or a good idea or whatever. The point is that critical theory is opposite to Western logical thought. And if the Russians brought critical theory, a fringe psychological discipline, to the States in the 60s and taught planted professors that would teach the next generation that would grow up understanding critical theory as opposed to Greek logical thought, and they would teach that to their kids, we're 3 or 4 generations deep on using critical theory as a way to get what we want, and that splits individual liberty from personal responsibility. Have all of the fun without any of the work, right?
But that can only last for gaining weight or what, anything in life, exactly. Eventually it ends in mass suffering.
Death.
And so my question for you is, how come this consumer culture, I think, is built on, when you sell somebody fun without work, you actually have to give them fun without work, right? So you have to give them that sugar rush, metaphorically speaking,
Exactly.
long enough for them to become not self-reliant anymore.
That's right.
And I don't know if that's as much a capitalist impulse, because capitalism wants to sell you products and make the most profit for the longest period of time. And then that's how you compete. Better products for cheaper, efficiency, yada, yada. But a big reason why I think we have this consumer culture now, 70% of the world's or the U.S. economy is consumption, meaning we import stuff and we buy it from China, which would beg another question. If China is such an enemy of the United States, why do we fund their military and then sell them our debt and all this kind of stuff? So that's a question for after. But I think the reason we are able to live above our means, meaning self-fund without work, is because of economics. We have the world reserve currency, meaning we can get in $32 trillion in debt and have the world still desire to buy that debt and pretend that we can fund Social Security in perpetuity. Like, you hear the numbers that are coming out of Washington and you're like, wait a second, what? Like 270 trillion in unfunded liabilities, and this isn't a problem? Oh no, it's not a problem for today. It's a problem for tomorrow or tomorrow's politicians. And because you haven't felt the pain, you still have this sugar rush. Like, you can still go to the store, even though people are starting to feel it. I've never heard the word inflation more than the last 2 years. Just your average citizen saying the word inflation. You're starting to feel the pain of those choices, those economic choices of, maybe we don't have to create goods and services. We can just buy them from other places. Maybe we can cut every single middle-class blue-collar job in the United States and ship them overseas because we have the world reserve currency and it's slightly cheaper to use slave labor in China. All these.
Well, it's short-term gains for long-term sacrifices, right?
But even if you're a business, you got to think about it. Like, if you're a business who makes stuff in the United States and you're competing with China, how are you going to compete with China?
And I still haven't found this yet. A guy told me about this, and I've been needing to find it and look it up. But there was a landmark case in the 80s, maybe 1986, where the board of directors sued a company to essentially say, the investors sued a company to say that their outcome, their interests, the investors' interests outweigh the interests of the consumers or the interests of the employees. And it was ruled to say, this was in the Reagan era, that the investors, since their capital that they invested, their interests outweigh everybody else's interests. And ever since then, you can see how companies stopped looking at long-term quality of the product and continuing to have relationships with their consumers and building a good place for their employees to live and maybe work their entire life. And it moved away from that toward quarterly earnings statements. You had to beat your quarterly earnings quarter after quarter after quarter. So it essentially, that landmark case prioritized selfishness. It said it started the divorce between individual liberty and responsibility, or it maybe continued that tear a little bit. And it said, the person who has the most money invested, that person is the person that is worth the most. So that person should experience the most rewards. Now, how do you do that? Quarter after quarter, with economies going up and down, and world economies going up and down and fluctuating, and natural disasters happening. First and foremost, by sacrificing your employees, by not paying them enough, by cutting vacation time, by grinding them for more product. The second thing you sacrifice is the quality of the product or your consumer. So you're looking for cheaper products and more products that don't last as long. So it's easy to outsource, right? So that landmark case started the business on the business side. Remember, like all of this stuff is connected, right? So when we talk about that theory, the ideology, that schism of maybe the Russian, still getting this figured out, getting the Russian, I'm sorry, give me a second to reset. We talk about that theory of Russia putting in those sleeper agents and teaching us that critical theory from generation to generation to generation. And then they see the opportunity of this tear in the economics. They say, wow, not only can we get the individuals, the citizens, to think selfishly and divorce their personal responsibility from their individual liberty, now we can get businesses to think selfishly and separate or tear their responsibility to be a good employer and provide a good workplace for their workers and provide a good product for their consumers. We can get them to tear that away from, their responsibility from individual liberty and the choices that they make. We can get them to sacrifice long-term gains for short-term gains. Well, then they started splitting the economics apart.
Well, in theory, I don't know if you are an advocate of capitalism, but in theory, another company would come along and outcompete them because. So why don't you think competition is alive and well in the United States if you have this impulse to sacrifice your employees over profits, which I always ask folks, hey, if we live in a finite world, which we do, you can't have infinite profits. But if you're a growth company, yeah, maybe. But if everyone in the world has Netflix, how does Netflix continue to make a profit?
But
they can make profit, but exponentially so.
That's a totally different conversation because there is infinite money. Because money isn't real value.
Right, but infinite profit. So our infinite purchasing power. Yeah.
We'll talk about that in just a second. Yeah. So we have the individual divorce of individual liberty and responsibility. We have the economic divorce of individual liberty and responsibility. And then we have that exact same thing happening in Washington. And that opened up the door to turn capitalism into crony capitalism. And I'm sure that you've heard that term. Mm-hmm. If we stuck with capitalism, just like with communism, right? If we stick with communism as it is designed, where we don't have the human condition and we don't have selfishness and we don't have corruption, then communism would be fine. It would work perfectly well. Just so if we stuck with capitalism and didn't go all crazy with regulation and we allowed competition to work, then you would have had proper competition. You wouldn't have had all of this outsourcing. But because of that initial divorce where the investors became the priority and their profits became more important than the other two, the consumer or the employees, they started playing dirty. So the regulation got in there. I mean, let's talk about big pharma as an easy example. Let's talk about COVID and all of those numbers, right? Like the reason American citizens are so unhealthy is because they think that they can fix everything with the pill. And the reason they think they can fix everything with the pill is because big pharma pays massive amounts of money every year for advertisements, telling them that they don't have to be fit, that they don't have to eat right. They can live their lifestyle however they want because they can fix it with a pill, because big pharma can sell them a pill. They can't sell them good, healthy food. They can't sell them fitness. They can't sell them a healthy lifestyle. You need broken people to consume drugs. A healthy person isn't going to consume drugs, right? So
mentally healthy for sure.
So that brings us back to that landmark case where the priorities So they started looking at Washington and regulation and sabotaging our economy or capitalism, our system. So now critical theory has split, outcome-based rationale has split psychology, individual liberty for the person. It has split economically in that landmark case. And it has split our politics. And it has essentially sabotaged or broken our economic system. At least that's how I put it together in my brain. Those are the I mean, I have no real evidence for this, right? You get little glimpses of it. Like there's no book on this, but it seems to make sense to me.
Yeah, it does to me. Now I want to dig into it because I think there's another layer deeper. Is you said there's infinite money, but not infinite value. You said earlier.
Money is divorced. Money is divorced from value. Money isn't valuable. Value, real true value, is something that has a benefit in your life, right? Like food or water or shelter. Like these are things of real value. Somehow, somewhere along the line, humans have misconstrued a commonly agreed upon measure of value, which is money, as having intrinsic value itself. Our money used to have intrinsic value because it used to be backed by gold. But have you ever seen the Zeitgeist movies?
No. This is like the third reference. I'm like, I don't know what you're... Yeah, but Zeitgeist.
Yeah, so I just go watch those movies. The first one is a little kooky. The second one, Addendum, is like the quickest summary of how our monetary system works. You can get an even faster rundown of it by looking up the YouTube video, The American Dream. It's an animated short. It's like 30 minutes. And it talks about conspiracy theories. And I'm not... Okay, listen. First of all, I don't believe in conspiracy theories because I don't believe that humans are consistent enough to be able to maintain a conspiracy long enough for it to work. Somebody's going to crumble. Somebody's going to stab somebody else in the back. I don't think that they work. So I don't really deal in conspiracy theories, but I do think that they are convenient methods of storytelling to get a point across and to explain something.
When you say conspiracy theories, you mean a large group of individuals working towards something in secret.
Or a small group. In this case.
And then keeping that secret.
Right. In this case, the conspiracy theory or the evil person that's responsible for all of the bad in the world are the red British banks or the red shield banks. Some people call them the Illuminati, and they point to like the little pyramid with the eye on the back of a dollar bill and all of that stuff. I don't know about any of that stuff, okay? And I don't really care about that stuff because it doesn't matter whether we discover that or figure it out. There's no way to act locally on that. All of this stuff, we started this discussion by saying think globally, act locally. It's the citizen's responsibility to use the First Amendment to get to information, to make sense of things, to understand things enough so that they can make informed decisions about their own life. So go watch the movies, That American Dream animated short and Zeitgeist Addendum to understand how money works. And then you will see that money has no intrinsic value. You can't do anything with money. You can't eat it. You can't use it to stay warm. You can't drink it. You can only use it to barter or exchange for those things of real value.
But neither does, really, gold doesn't have a ton of intrinsic value either.
That's right. It has one thing that makes it exceedingly valuable. Pure gold can be manipulated or moved with Stone Age tools. It's a soft metal. It's also an extremely pliable metal. So with a rock and enough time, you can turn gold into a scalpel because you can pound gold thin enough to 1 atoms worth thick. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You can pound it thin enough that it's only 1 atom thick, which means you can, with a rock, sharpen gold into a scalpel, and you can actually operate with it. So you can save somebody's life with that.
But it has so why do you think it has monetary value?
Because it's rare.
Yeah. And it's rare because it takes energy and human capital to get it out of the earth. It doesn't fall from the sky.
And rarity is the greatest measure of value, right? Because humans have always operated and still operate under the perception of scarcity. In fact, that is a fundamental universal truth and principle. Get somebody to understand that they have enough, that what they have is enough, and that they no longer live in a world of scarcity, and you can remarry the concepts of individual liberty and responsibility.
That's one of the biggest. I think it's Thomas Sowell who says, first rule of economics is scarcity, and the first rule of politics is to forget about the first rule of economics.
That's right.
So there's this incentive, there's this lie that we can all, which this is what I always come back to on this channel, and you're kind of speaking my language because we talk a lot about value and what is value and thinking back, because a lot of people have started to have these thoughts subconsciously when they go to the grocery store. And like, I always ask people, how do you know if something's cheap or expensive? Because price, the number you see, is a relative thing. So how do you know, like homes, for instance, are expensive? Is it just because they doubled in price? Is it nominal versus real? Anyways, I think that divorcing from that everyone can have anything they want, I always make this argument on this channel, is what we spend the money on is a political question and a moral question when it comes to taxation, whether you believe in it or not. But when we have a pooled form of capital, what we spend it on is that question, a moral or political one. How much money we spend is a math question, and we've forgotten math, right? So we don't have to say we got to cut military spending and add this. We can do both. We can have Social Security run to the moon. We can have we end the longest war in U.S. history, and the military budget goes up. All these things can happen, and no one pays a consequence, except we do. Through the invisible tax of inflation. And I think that's going to be probably one of the biggest trends in history, or, looking back, is like people rediscovering what is valuable in their life, because we have this illusion, this consumerism and that sugar rush we talked about, this illusion that, hey, you can kind of sit back and you can make non-valuable things like a TikTok short or whatever, or maybe even this podcast. I mean, it might be valuable to some people, might educate them, but I'm not making a good or service. And getting back there, like onshoring here in the United States, I think is going to be a big trend in in this decade and the next. But I wanted to get into segue here, but I wanted to get into, you mentioned scarcity is value, right? And money was always that tool to solve the convenience of wants. You sell cows, I sell apples. Yep. You don't need apples. We got a problem here.
It's your translator. Yeah.
So I did a video a while back on like money is language, and price. Subconsciously, you're thinking like, and the market, it's a market signal that says there's a lot less of this and there's a lot more demand. We need to create more of it. And because go ahead.
That principle, by the way, that works in communism as well. They just interpret it differently. I mean, you're still going to barter to get things that you want. You're still going to want things, and certain things are going to cost more than other things.
To some degree, but that's the farce of like that's capitalist. Like if you're a capitalist and you see a good example of this is like, let's say in Florida, you have a typhoon that hits, and people know it's coming, or hurricane is coming. People know it's coming. So as always, they go to the store, all the water's gone, all the generators gone, etc. And so there might be one generator left, and they've marked it up 10x, right? Because they can sell it. The government can come in, this is communism, and say it's illegal to cause this price to go above X, Y, and Z. They can do that. But what does that do? It creates a shortage because there's no incentive to create more supply. So if the government let the prices go to the moon, then what happens in all the surrounding states? If you have a generator and you start doing the math, I can drive down there with gas and coming back. I can make this much money selling my used generator to these people that need it. In comes the supply because there is a profit motive. That is the difference between communism, is there is no profit motive. So if you were a market actor and you see, okay, the price of wheat's going up, I need to create more of that. Why would you create more? You can't make any more money. So
I'm sorry, I misspoke. What I meant was that the principles of supply and demand always apply, regardless of which economic system you use, right? Yep. The economic system only dictates the way that the government regulates those things.
Correct.
So
if the government ignores it, if they pretend that doesn't exist, supply and demand, it creates massive distortions in the market, also known as you starving to death.
Which we saw and we've seen decade after decade in communist nations, right? Yep. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I got you off track.
No. So when we talk value, and scarcity, like one of my biggest learning, I guess, hobbies and passions the last couple of years is digging through all this has been Bitcoin. Understanding what it is, why it's important, and how it can solve. Because I think to myself, gold failed. We did have a gold back system, but you can't use gold as a currency, like a straight up currency. It has to be pegged to something. Currency has to be pegged to it because you're not shaving gold for a cup of coffee.
Well, you can't have real value back your monetary system and not eventually get to a deflationary economy.
Why is deflationary bad?
Well, it's not if we want things to stay the same.
How so?
That video, Zeitgeist of Denim, I mean, it covers everything. Okay. But essentially, wrap her in a nutshell. We have more people. So you need more food. You need more stuff. You need more resources. So you have to grow in some way, which means you have to have debt so that you can loan money. Well, I'm not doing a very good job of this, but essentially things have to grow. So you have to have inflation so that you can have more and more money because you have more and more people. Deflationary.
Well, finish your thought. Sorry.
A deflationary economy means what you have today is going to be worth more tomorrow than it is today. So the incentive is to keep what you have rather than to spend money. And if you're not spending money, money isn't flowing. So you're not borrowing and you're not spending. And that means because of the cycle of money, if you track money from the Federal Reserve, who loans it to the U.S. government in exchange for promissory notes, and then the government gives it to the big banks, and the big banks loan it to the medium banks, and the medium banks loan it to the smaller banks. And each time there's a loan, they only have to guarantee a certain amount, 10, 50, 80%, whatever, which means that they can loan out more money than they have. And that's how you create more money, right? It's through that process. And you have an incentive to spend money because things are going to be more expensive tomorrow than they are today. Money flows, and if money flows, you can make more money. A deflationary economy stops all of that in its tracks and says, tomorrow, the thing is going to be less expensive than it is today. So I'm going to keep my money. So money doesn't flow. You don't borrow, you don't spend, and you can't grow. So with gold, there's only so much gold. So if you keep to the gold standard, things have to start costing less and less down the line because you have more and more people that you have to divvy the gold out to. So money or economy can't keep track with the increase in the human population. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, it does.
I mean, I guess I should have said, did I explain that properly?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So I would have a couple follow-up kind of rhetorical questions. If inflation's good, more inflation's better because more money is spent, right?
No, because then you have a runaway effect. Everything in moderation, right?
Okay. So if things being cheaper is not a bad thing, right?
Right.
Like basically it raises the standard of living by lowering the cost.
Right.
Now, saving, the theory of saving is the thing you use to purchase. It's not investing. That's what people think saving is now.
Right.
Because they realize, hey, that my purchasing power is eroding. But I get what you're saying. Like, in order to give out loans, etc. But allocation of capital is very important, like where it goes. Because there's a lot of banks that give out money and did it in 08. No income, no credit, no job, whatever.
Well, they just recently did it again.
Yes. They do it for college students too.
Yeah.
Why do they do it? Like, they do it because of risk or lack thereof. Because they realize, because there is risk. Free market economics, if you give out a loan, if a bank, which I totally get, here's the base layer of money. Maybe it's gold, maybe it's Bitcoin, whatever. And then I'm going to give out a loan for a car. And when they pay back that loan, guess what happens to the money? It goes bye-bye. So there's more money being created off of that base layer. If they don't pay back the money, what happens to the bank? They have to eat that cost. That risk doesn't exist today, because if there's a systemic risk issue with banks where they have to eat the cost, i.e. Silicon Valley Bank,
yes,
that was just about to go under, the government eats that cost or creates a new law, etc. So it incentivizes prices to go up even further. And if you were a loaning institution who is giving a 17-year-old a loan for a Lamborghini, you would think that's ridiculous. But they do the same thing for college. Why they do it? Because they can't bankrupt on it. So,
well, you keep saying like can't, or that there is no risk, but there is.
There is.
We're just not getting to pay it. And I'm not sure if we're going to pay for it by the time or within the lifetime of the folks who made those decisions. Remember
what
that?
I mean by there is risk, but that's the systemic, like the whole system collapses.
That's right.
If you pretend.
That's right.
Pretend that risk doesn't exist. So in economics, what a bank is basically a loaning institution that assesses risks. That's what a bank is. So they assess if you're able to, if they give you this loan, are you going to pay it back? Because if you don't, they eat that cost. But the problem is, if you don't pay it back and it's systemic, there's a lot of people not paying back loans. The government just goes, we'll print more money. So a bank that has really tight risk parameters is not going to make a lot of money, because they realize, hey, Goldman Sachs and all these other people are super big friends with the government. So if they get into trouble, they get bailed out.
That's right.
So I think a monetary standard that cannot be distorted, whether that be gold, whether that be Bitcoin, and the reason I'm a big fan of Bitcoin is I think it solves some of the problems that gold couldn't solve. But that doesn't mean you can't make loans on top of it. It just means that monetary base can't be distorted. So you can play all the games you want, but you will suffer the consequences if you don't run a good loan book, and there's nobody to bail you out.
The cool thing about cryptocurrencies is that the regulation of the money supply is built into the algorithm, right?
For Bitcoin.
Well, to all cryptocurrencies, the algorithm is just different.
Yes, but the algorithm can be controlled by all other cryptocurrencies minus Bitcoin. That's why I focus on it. Have some kind of central authority that can change the monetary rules of the game if they decide to.
Right, and that's I guess that's true. But what's cool about cryptocurrencies is that it's trying to decentralize the regulation of the money supply. So you're not going to have an Alan Greenspan having a cold or sneezing or whatever, and the stock market takes a dive, and that has ripple effects all the way across, right? It's not the human that's manipulating it or controlling it. It's because humans are corrupt in the human condition and selfish. It was an attempt to remove humanity or the human condition from the regulation of the monetary supply. And I think that it's cool And I think that's why Bitcoin is the crypto reserve currency, is because it is a untamperable algorithm, unless you get more than 51% market share, right? Then
of computing power.
That's right. So as long as that stays well, and again, human selfishness kind of screwed that all up. I mean, the whole design, the whole idea was for every person to have a miner in their house, and everybody use Bitcoin, and we just get away from regular currency. But then people got greedy, so they made all of these farms, and they started working the algorithm really hard. And then we had GPUs and ASICs and like all of this stuff, right? And now we're spending like what, a fifth of the world's electricity on mining Bitcoin because the algorithm has gotten so hard. So because of that selfishness. But anyway, the point is value, right?
Right.
And being able to perceive value. All of this stuff that you and I are talking about right now in economics is kind of redundant. What we need to do is get back to the individual and teach the individual. It's not about how much money you make. It's about what you value. And I'll tell you what some really good values are. Love is a fantastic value, and it costs very little, right? Serving, being compassionate, being kind and caring, that is a fantastic value to have. And it will heap rewards on your life every single moment of every single day, right? And you don't have to work your hands to the bone. So when we talk about resource management, sorry, I need to take a step back. There are 3 resources that a human being has control over: time, money, and calories. Every human being is given 24 hours when they wake up in the morning. Whatever amount of time that they don't properly invest that day is thrown away. They will never get it back. Most of the time, most humans trade that time in that day at work for money. And if you're lucky and you're savvy with how you work your money and all of these other things that you and I were just talking about, investments and savings and all of that stuff, maybe you'll get lucky and be able to buy back some time at the end of your life. And that's true regardless of which economic system you're in. In communism, the state tells you how long to work. In capitalism, how savvy you are is how long you have to keep working. The point remains, you're going to trade this free resource that you're given every day, time, for money. And maybe one day you can buy back some time with it to spend in the things of value, like love. And the last resource most humans have the ability to control is calories. The easy one is calories in. How are you feeding your body, your system, the way that you interface with the world? Are you consuming good quality calories? Are you making a decision to eat good food that is a short-term sacrifice and a long-term gain? Stuff that's like fresh, real food, not processed, enough protein, good vitamins and minerals? Or are you going for the donuts and the sugar rush and the easy options, right? The type of fuel you put into your body is what allows you to be able, in part, to make the correct decisions, to know where to put your time and your money. But most importantly, and the thing that most people never think about, is after you've taken the calories in, where are you spending your calories? Are you spending them on worrying about stuff that you can't change? Are you spending your calories trying to solve the world's problems and forgetting to act locally? Or more importantly, to love yourself, the people around you, your neighbors, your spouse, your children? Like, that's the thing that nobody is talking about. And that is how you fix scarcity. That is how you fix everything. Make people realize that they have control over where they invest their calories, their energy, and help them find a way to invest those calories in worthwhile things of value, like love. Because if you're spending time with your kids or you're spending time with your your spouse, or you're spending time with your friends and your neighbors, then you're going to have conversations. You don't have to know everything. You're going to talk about economics. You're going to talk about all of these other things, and you're going to help each other. And we're going to marry up personal responsibility and individual liberty. We're all going to become we the people again, right? So that's resource management.
That's a good way of putting it. that convicts me. Like before we started recording, like we were talking about worry and like, and maybe it was during the recording, but anyways, we were talking about like how you can get lost in the sauce because there's so much. You know, you can go down rabbit holes where you're like, oh, well, they ended up killing John F. Kennedy, or they did this, or they did that, which is fine. But can you solve it? Can you do anything to make the world a better place because you have that knowledge or you have that question lingering in your mind? It's not a bad thing to necessarily know, but where you should put your focus is your local community. Because if you can change your local community, you know, it has this ripple effect. So real quick before we're getting towards the end, but I wanted to ask, this is why we started talking in the first place. Matt and I are both in the military, and Matt has decided to get out of the military. And I wanted to dive into why you joined, why you're getting out, and then if you have any advice for potentially somebody who's thinking about joining the military today, what advice would you give them as far as, do you think that is a good path if they're joining to serve their country or not?
We should actually do a separate podcast on that.
Okay, dude, you know what? It's gone long enough. We should.
Because that is a fantastic question, and I have lots of information on that, and we should give it its proper due.
I love it. I'm putting it on my to-do list.
Because this one was kind of about value, right?
Yep.
And having like when we started, I was like, I don't really know what we're talking about, but it ended up being about value because we have to have that foundation and those principles, right? That we use to evaluate everything in life. Like a principle you can ascribe to anything, or you can use it to evaluate anything and know whether that thing is right or wrong or good or bad. So if we've level set that, now we can use those principles to start looking at specific issues, military being the next one. Let's talk about all of the heavy hitting, difficult issues that nobody wants to talk about, like abortion and gun control and like all of those things, right? But we have to have this layer of foundation and principles to then evaluate all of those other issues by.
Agreed. Because we'll just be, that's where I think our country is at that base layer of principles. Because if you don't have the same principles, if you're arguing with a communist over personal liberty and responsibility, you're probably not going to agree because you don't agree on the base layer.
That's right.
I like that idea. Next week, then we're going to do another one of these.
Great.
Put it on your schedule.
That's right.
So Matt, where can people find you if they want to know more? I know you got an Instagram page. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
I got to tell you, man, it's been a slow burn because the military did get in there and kind of slow things down. But I've had a project for a long time, and I will just continue on that project. It's called Citizen Earned, because I'm a citizen and I've earned my citizenship. And I try to be an example of how folks can earn their citizenship every day. Not just the piece of paper that says that they're a U.S. citizen, but to really live out that individual liberty and personal responsibility thing every single day.
That's on Instagram. Are you on Facebook
YouTube
or Twitter and YouTube? Okay.
Just Instagram and YouTube.
Okay. Citizen Earned on Instagram and YouTube. And I'll link those in the description below if people want to check him out, and I'll have him back on the show. So if you guys have any further questions for Matt, or you guys wanted us to delve deeper into a subject, or we left a question lingering that you wanted the answer to, put those comments in the comment section down below. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Thanks. Bye.